Hello, and welcome to the PSA Professional Development Panel focused on careers in the advocacy and nonprofit space. We have three wonderful panelists joining us today to share their experiences and advice. We'll start the panel with brief introductions, then I will pose some questions to our panelists, and we'll conclude with a little time for audience Q&A. As a reminder, this panel will also be recorded and hosted as a resource on the PSA website. I'll be serving as your chair today. My name is Amanda Grigg. I use she, her pronouns. I am a first-generation college student, meaning that I'm the first in my family to attend college. I earned my bachelor's in political science from the University of Michigan and my master's and PhD in political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I spent a few years in the academic world teaching undergraduate courses and conducting research before shifting to the nonprofit space. And today I serve as a program officer for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Now I will invite our panelists to introduce themselves before we dive into our first question. Please share your name, organization, title, how long you've been in that role, and for fun, your undergraduate concentration within political science. You're also welcome to share anything else you'd like the audience to know. And I will pick someone to start us off. Sarah, are you okay to start us off with introductions?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Oros. I work at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. I'm a program coordinator for fair housing and fair lending. I started 2 years ago. I graduated from Gannon University in 2019 with a degree in political science, and I focused in business administration. So pretty related to what I do. And NCRC is a nonprofit organization that focuses on economic justice, fair housing, fair lending, business issues, and community reinvestment.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's go to Gabby next.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm Gabrielle, but I go by Gabby. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for Leading Women of Tomorrow. It's a pretty new organization. We basically want to help young women go into careers in public service. So what I do in my role is I host a bunch of professional development events and webinars related to law school admissions, graduate school admissions, career consulting, and so on, just to help these young girls mobilize themselves and figure out what they want to do in their lives. I started last year, so it's almost a year since I've been the Director of Alumni Relations. And I went to American University with a major in political science, and my concentration was in American government. So yeah, that's all about me. Looking forward to answering all your questions later.
Thank you, Gabby. And last but not least, Clarissa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. It's great to be here with you all today. My name is Clarissa Unger. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. The SLSV Coalition is the national hub and largest nonpartisan network in the country, working to increase college student participation in elections. And I got a bachelor's in political science and international studies from the University of Kansas and graduated in 2009, and also have a master's in comparative European politics from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, and a master's of public administration also from the University of Kansas. Excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, everyone. And I will say I'm also excited that we have a breadth of experience in terms of how long your organizations have been around. I think that's a really interesting perspective, particularly for nonprofits. I think you can get a really different experience depending on if you're in an organization that's been around for 200 years or 2 years. So that's an exciting feature of our panel. So now that everyone is you're all established in this career path, I'd love to hear about what a typical day or week looks like in your role. And I think we'll go reverse order this time. So Clarissa, if you can start, and then Gabby, then Sarah.
Yeah, happy to. Well, the truth is there really is no typical day in my role. Just to tell you a little bit more about our team. So I lead a team of 9 other people as well. I manage 5 of those people directly. So my typical day is often checking in with various members of my team, having meetings with folks externally, sometimes talking with funders or writing grant proposals, checking in on how different projects that we're working on are going. So like many folks are experiencing now, lots of Zoom calls. I spend a lot of my time on Zoom, and my team tries to connect pretty frequently as well. So we connect as a team every day at 5 o'clock, regardless of whether we have something work related to check in or not. So lots of Zoom calls, always about different things, but a lot of check-ins with my team, and a lot of fundraising.
Thank you. Gabby, do you want to tell us a little bit about your typical day or week?
Yeah, absolutely. So mine's very similar to Clarissa. There's no typical day. I will say for me, I host a lot of events because I'm the director of alumni relations, and these events are usually tailored to career consulting, graduate school consulting, so on and so on. So what I would do is host an event during a week, and then I have people follow up with me. And then I would give them individualized sessions tailored to their own needs. So for example, last week I had a special event on law school admissions. I had a bunch of people set schedule appointments with me the following week just to talk about law school, and I'd help them create their own individualized plan for going into law school and to see if that was something they want to consider in the future. In addition to that, I also meet a lot with the executive director of our organization. We're fairly new. We've been around for 3 years. So I talk with her a lot about creating the organization to be more engaged with other people, partnerships, so on and so on. And it's really great just to talk to people and meet inspiring women who want to just go into this field and help other people. So it's just really great to talk to people, and I really love what I do.
This raises a follow-up question for me, so Clarissa told us about how many people are on your team. I think you said it's like maybe 10 total with you. Gabby, can you tell us how many people are in your organization? I think that's really helpful context to sort of compare to.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually have 25 people. So we have different departments inside our organization. So we have people in the digital media. They have people who work under them, director of alumni relations, people who report to me, the CFO, people who report to them. So that's kind of how we're organized.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your typical day, week, and then add in a little of that context, the sort of size of your organization and maybe structure?
Sure. My organization, first off, it really varies depending on the policy work that they're doing. So there's normally 50 to 75 people coming in and out of NCRC at a time. My team has 5 or 6. So I work under general counsel on enforcement mostly. So a typical week or day for me would consist of deciding what like grant deliverables or projects I'm working on. I do a lot of test coordination. So reaching out to testers, scheduling things, creating profiles for a test. Like right now I'm doing lending tests, which would consist of having people call financial institutions and reporting back on how they're treated, any differences in treatment, things like that. So that all happens in the span of 1 week. So I schedule it, make some profiles, check in with testers throughout the week. I could do anywhere between like 4 or 5 a week. And then any other investigations that my team's working on, we meet once a week and we do that. Prior to COVID, my role did include travel, but we're doing this all over Zoom right now. So I'm hoping this year we can get back to traveling, because that was about like 25% of my role was going to different cities and getting to train the testers in person. So that was a really cool part of my job that I hope to get back to, but not quite yet.
That's great. And Sarah, you said something, I can't remember now if you said this today or in our pre-meeting, that your job is sort of like a secret shopper for like civil rights. Is that, how did you phrase that?
Yes, it's like mystery shopping. So like I always compare it to whenever like someone's doing a review of a restaurant, they go in undercover and they taste the food and they do the review. So it's kind of like that. We train people to do, they can call it a financial institution. They can walk into an open house, and whatever the protected class it is that we're investigating, it could be race, disability, sex, sexual orientation now is under the Fair Housing Act. So however we choose to design those tests, and it really is dependent on the project or grant that we're working on, but any of those things we can investigate.
Great. I just loved that way of describing it. That was helpful to me. Thank you. And I will say, just to add another sort of perspective here, the National Academies has, I think, a staff of over 1,000. And before this, I was in an organization that had a staff of 35 or 40. So it's been really interesting to see the difference in sort of how an organization is structured from, you know, when everyone could basically get on a Zoom call together to when that's not at all possible. So that's always interesting. And then one thing I'm seeing, I think, or I'm hearing from you all, which is also seems common to sort of nonprofit advocacy work, is that you all you have a focus, but you do maybe like a little bit of everything to an extent, which is something that I really enjoy about nonprofit work, because I think I get bored if I did, you know, just one narrow thing. So that's a theme that folks might follow through this conversation. So thinking about executing all of those tasks and responsibilities that you just talked through, I'd love to hear a little bit about the skills or talents that you think are really essential to do the work that you do. And then I'll follow up if you want to start thinking about, my follow-up question will be about how college prepared you and sort of what you learned on the job. But let's start with sort of what are the key skills, talents that you think you need to do the work you do. And this time we'll start with Gabby, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. You know, I feel like there are a lot of skills you need just for my position. I think one of them is definitely having the interpersonal skills. I meet with a lot of girls who want to go to law school or graduate school and who don't know what they want to do with their lives after college. So I think for me, meeting with them and understanding who they are and trying to figure out what might be best for them is really important, because everyone's different. You don't want to tell everybody the same exact thing. You kind of have to tailor it to their own needs. I would also say organization skills are very important. I host a lot of events, as I mentioned earlier, and I have to create PowerPoints for these events. I have to set dates for the events. I have to broadcast the events on our social media. So I have to basically organize these events by myself just to get people to come out, because we are fairly new and sometimes not a lot of people know about us, but we've done a really great job, I think, getting a lot of people to come to these events. And I think, you know what, this is kind of maybe a weird one, but I would say just being perceptive. I don't know if you know what I mean, you know, being perceptive to other people in your team, because in a nonprofit, you have to understand kind of how people work. And, you know, emotional intelligence is very important in the advocacy field. So I would say having the emotional intelligence and knowing when to speak up and knowing when to be quiet and to listen to other people and understand their perceptions and the personalities around you, I would say are very important traits you need for my position.
Yes, I think emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills are worth their weight in gold in the advocacy and nonprofit space, especially if you work with members, but also internally. So I will ditto that. Clarissa, what about you?
Yeah, so with our team, professional development is a really big part of like the work that we do with our team, and that like in my role is really important to me. And so for our team in particular, we've actually established a series of essential skills and core values that we check in on annually with each team member to see sort of how they're doing, how we can like help them grow in those different areas. So I've got a list. So the essential skills and core values that are really important to our team are being able to problem solve, project manage, communications, and that's both internal and external communications. We are a coalition as well. And so one of our core values that we check in on regularly is also, are we consistently supporting and trusting the local leaders that we work with? Also, as Gabby mentioned, organizational support is really important. Like even to the point of like, are you following up and doing your timesheets and things like that? Like that kind of stuff is really important to be on top of. Also, again, as we are a coalition, working collaboratively, producing high quality work, and also demonstrating a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are some of the things that are really important to our team and that we check in on a regular basis.
Great, those really resonate. And they also, I think we're starting to see some common themes. So Sarah, what would you add to this? What are the key skills that you think are essential for your work?
Agree with everything that both of you have said already. I think the biggest one is just knowing how to work with other people, especially when you're working on a grant and there's so many things that need to happen. There's 20 people on the grant and you're not in charge of making sure it all gets done, but like you need to do the one thing really well. Especially as a program coordinator, I do a lot of like the actual deliverables on these things. So making sure that I'm getting so many things done so that we can report correctly on it. Another skill that maybe I didn't think that I would need to use as much is just writing and research. Things that like you do in college, like you know how to write a paper, you know how to do this research, but something that I found myself using a lot and relying on other people at my organization to help me with as I'm learning how to do it, like the NCRC way.
That's a great point. And I think transferring your skills to your organization, there can also be a little bit of sort of translation of like, maybe you have the skill, but learning the unique way that they do it. And that will always take a little bit of sort of on the job learning, which is a perfect transition, Sarah, thank you, to my follow-up questions, which are, how did college, and maybe it's your political science career, maybe it's an extracurricular, how did it prepare you? Where did you really pull from your college experience? Like Sarah just gave us an example. And then what did you maybe learn on the job? What did you really sort of learn on the ground that maybe you hadn't directly pulled that skill from college? And let's start with Clarissa this time.
Great, happy to. Yeah, I would say the thing that I learned more than anything in college that I apply to my day-to-day work is just the critical thinking skills that I was taught through my political science degree. In my role, I'm constantly being pulled by funders and by partners and by other folks on my team to do different things and take on different things, whether that's me personally doing it or having our team or our organization take them on. And I have to constantly sort of step back and critically assess like whether that really makes sense for us strategically. So that I think is definitely the biggest thing that I learned in college, especially like through my political science degree. That said, there's a lot that I didn't learn in college that I have learned on the job in this role. And I think that really kind of falls into three buckets. So the first being management. I think all facets of being a manager are really hard to learn until you're actually managing another full-time person. The second being just navigating nonprofit laws and how nonprofits are structured. And especially since I was a co-founder of our organization, like we really had to figure out, like, should we be fiscally sponsored by another organization? Does that make sense for us? Should we start the process of setting up our own 501c3? And there's no real clear guidance on like what is best for any sort of work or any sort of project. So we've had to navigate that on our own as well. And then I mentioned this earlier, but also fundraising. In my experience, there's no clear cookie cutter way to manage funder relations, and it can be very unpredictable. And so I think just being on the job and working with funders and with donor relations has really given me the skills that I need in that area to do the job that I have to do as an executive director.
Thank you. And Sarah, we'll go to you next. You sort of previewed this question, so maybe you can say a little bit more about that, or if there's other things that you learned.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the things that I took from my undergraduate experience into the working world were internships and clubs that I was doing outside of my classes. So my last semester of undergrad, I actually took an internship in Washington, D.C. with NCRC, and that's how I got connected with them and ended up getting this role. So I would say that was really valuable, and just getting some face time with actual people actually doing this work is really important. And I did an internship prior to that too, where it's just really important to learn how to work with people and talk with people and meet people in the sphere that you're working in. Yeah, I think that's about it. I just really value internships, especially in political science. I feel like they're really important.
That on the ground experience and network building is really valuable. Gabby, what about you?
Yeah, so, I would say in college, I definitely was taught a lot of technical things with regards to nonprofits, about setting up a 501c3, the organization of a nonprofit, fundraising, writing for public policy. So I think, in classes, they teach you more of the logistical, technical things. But I think the whole atmosphere of college kind of gives you the other skills you need for your job. So the emotional intelligence, the time management, the teamwork, all that. I think just being in college and having to work with other people gives you these skills. You have to learn how to fend for yourself, right? How to take responsibility for yourself and not miss deadlines for work, because we have these deadlines in classes and in our job as well. So I say that's also an important skill that I learned in college. And I want to go off what Sarah said about internships. I think internships really are helpful, not just because you have them on your resume, just to make your resume, look better or to have more experience, but I think they're necessary so you know how to network and so you can experience a 9-to-5 job in a way, and so you could actually learn what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I know for me, when I interned in college, I hated working on Capitol Hill. It helped me because I thought I was going to work there my entire life, and I went there and I was like, this is not it. So it really does help you, and I think ultimately college is a great experience because you learn valuable things in your classes that you take with you, that you memorize, but then you learn life skills, which is really important. And it's not just about having that degree. It's about coming out of college as a mature and individualized human being.
These are such good responses. I will flag too, it feels like people are maybe doing more remote internships now, which is great because if internships are unpaid, that can be really inaccessible for some folks. So that's something to think about. And I also love the idea of you might have an internship and hate it, but that's actually really valuable information. I had a similar experience. In undergrad, I did an internship and I was like, oh, no, but you don't know, you just don't know until you've been there. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Then just some kind of, go ahead, Clarissa.
I was just going to add to that. I had the exact same experience. I interned with the State Department and I thought I wanted to, do the Foreign Service exam. And after I interned, I was like, nope, this is not what's right for me in my life right now. That's not what I'm doing.
Yes. It's right for somebody, just those were not our places. Yes. And thinking of we're definitely seeing some themes, I think, from this question that I loved what Gabby had to say about some of the skills that you're taking away will be directly from the classroom. Maybe on your resume, you're saying I took a class in nonprofit management and that is a one-to-one. I took the class, here it is on my resume. But some of those things will be, I worked in an organization with 20 other students and we had to collaborate and we had to set our own deadlines and I had to manage complicated interpersonal dynamics, and some of those things will be even less sort of formal, but those are still really valuable skills. And that also reminds me of something I've been hearing a lot, which is that I feel like job ads have 20 or 30 skills on them that they are looking for. And just as a reminder, there is no unicorn that has every single one of those skills. So don't hesitate to apply for things if you're really strong in some of them. Maybe you don't have experience in others, because as Clarissa mentioned, you can learn some of that on the job. So don't think that you have to tick every single box in order to be a qualified candidate, and also remember that a lot of your skills translate, even things that you might not be thinking of. So this was a really helpful, I think, set of questions. And then we're getting into our last little group of questions before we get to audience Q&A. So hang in there, audience. This is a fun one. What do you like best about your job? What's the most satisfying part of your job, the most, heartwarming or fun? What do you like best? And we will start with Sarah this time.
Okay. I really like my job. I mean, like you guys were saying, you had bad internship experiences. I loved my internship and I love my job. And I feel really lucky because I know most people's first job out of undergrad, they do not have that experience. So I really like my job. I like every part of it. But I think the most satisfying thing is doing direct intakes with people. So part of NCRC is if someone feels they've been discriminated against in any way, they can just call us and talk to us about it. And it's really satisfying for me, having been trained and having the knowledge and knowing how to actually help people and not just contribute to some research. And I do that as well, but having actual answers that I could tell somebody, this is how you file a complaint with the CFPB or whatever the case may be. And having that knowledge is very, very satisfying. And it makes me really enjoy what I'm doing because I feel like I'm actually helping people.
And sometimes those pieces that are most sort of satisfying or rewarding can help energize you when you're doing the things that are, Clarissa was talking before about, like, we got to fill out our timesheets, which is important, but it can be, that balance is good of like the stuff that really energizes you. Speaking of Clarissa, what about you, Clarissa?
I would say for me, I think this is pretty general for a lot of folks in the nonprofit and the public sector space. Just knowing that you're making an impact and that your work is actually changing lives, or like you're just really having an impact on people's lives. So particularly for me and through the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, we approach elections and election participation a little bit different from a lot of typical voter engagement organizations, because we really try to resource like local leaders on campuses and help them do this work in order to like turn out students to vote and make students' voices heard in the election process. And for us, it's been like kind of going against the grain in a lot of ways, like I mentioned, of other people in the space, but we have seen, a lot of great outcomes, and student voting has been increasing steadily since we launched the coalition in 2016. And so I think just knowing that you're making an impact is huge for me, and also kind of seeing it when it clicks for other people that have either been in the space or not. It's really rewarding, and I love that aspect of this work.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest sort of perks of the kind of work that we do, is that mission matters. Gabby, what about you?
Yeah, I ultimately echo everything Sarah and Clarissa just said. I can give one specific scenario that I really, it brings in my mind today. So there is this girl who came to one of my info sessions on careers in public health. And it was a very comprehensive session. We were basically talking about the different types of pathways in public health. And at the end of the session, she raises her hand and says to me, "I never learned any of this in college." And I just I felt so upset. And I thought to myself, why are these girls paying so much money for college if they're not going to teach them the things they need for their careers? And it just really made me just think about the roles that we have as nonprofit workers, and our goal is to help other people. And I just really love the fact that I was able to give this girl the information she needed that she did not get in college, which shouldn't have happened. I mean, they need to step up and do what they need to do to help other girls. But I think when they don't, we need to step in and help them out themselves. So yeah, it's just so rewarding to help people and help them realize what they truly want to do and give them information they should have known, That was really sad. I mean, if you're in college, you should have known this, but it's just so sad that the educational system is messed up in certain ways, but that's where we come in and help other people.
Absolutely. That's like a meta double whammy response, because one, it's that direct service impact that's so meaningful and rewarding, but also a reminder of why we're here on this panel, which is that a lot of folks graduate undergrad not knowing that any of our careers, for example, is an option. I remember going into undergrad and I basically knew any career that I had personally interacted with. So I knew teachers and doctors and chefs and lawyers, like anything I had seen in media or but I had no grasp on the nonprofit sector, for example, or the range of careers. So again, thank you all for being here today and helping share some of that experience and knowledge. And we're starting to get questions from the audience. So exciting. Okay, last question, and then we'll turn to these audience questions. So if anyone else in the audience wants to pop in questions while we're answering this last one, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll return to them. We have a relatively small group, so if you've got 2 questions, put all your questions in. We welcome questions. So last question from me. What do you wish you had known before entering the nonprofit space? And again, Gabby actually teed us up for this one really well. So maybe I'll go to you first, Gabby. What do you wish you had known before entering this field?
Wow, let me think. You know what? The pay. I'm kidding. Just kidding. You guys agree. It's okay. I'm kidding. You know what? I would say just not everyone's going to have the same vision as you. And that's something that I struggled with just because, so this kind of goes to another question that people may ask, but before working as Director of Alumni Relations for the National Board of LWT, Leading Women of Tomorrow, I was a chapter president at American University. And because I was president, I could do whatever I wanted. It was up to me to set the rules and create organization, events, and so on. And then when I'm working under somebody else as the Director of Alumni Relations, it's so different because obviously what the executive director says goes, right? So it's like, you can give your advice and your opinion, but ultimately the executive director has the way in which they want the company to go moving forward. So I think just having that balance of keeping true to yourself and what you want and finding a middle ground with the director of the organization is really important. And you may not be able to impose everything you want right away. Just finding that middle ground and learning how to compromise is something that I definitely wish I had known moving forward into the nonprofit sector.
That's a great point. And that can be a really dramatic shift between if you're the leader of your organization as an undergraduate and then you suddenly jump to, you're an entry first career out of college sort of position. That's a really big shift. So that's a great reminder, Gabby. Clarissa, what about you?
I guess one thing that I wish I would have known is just how constantly challenging it would be. I mean, I think, again, a lot of us get into roles in the public sector and at nonprofits because we see challenges and we see problems and we want to solve them. But even internally, like there's always challenges that have to be addressed, whether it's with fundraising or internal team challenges, or someone is leaving to go work somewhere else. And then you have to like figure out how to fill that role. It's really rewarding. And I really like that part of it, but there's always just a new challenge and things are never just sort of settled and stable, it seems.
Yes, and especially, I think that's probably common across nonprofit careers, and it might be heightened too in a newer organization. So that's starting to get to our first audience question, which we'll get to in a moment, but that there can be differences too if you're looking at a new organization that you're helping to build is both exciting and has its unique challenges versus an older organization. And there you might encounter maybe even more of what Gabby was talking about in it can be harder to bring, new ideas or change things, especially if you're not in the sort of top leadership position. Sarah, what about you? What do you wish you had known?
Thankfully, this isn't my job, but more about fundraising. I think I had a really poor understanding of how much everything that everybody does, at least at my organization, would impact the funding that we receive. And it is not my role as a program coordinator to find funding, thankfully, but it is a very stressful part of a lot of my team members' work is we need to produce this many things in order to meet a grant deliverable. And that's really stressful because nobody expects to have to fundraise their salary. But it's just something I wish I knew a little bit more about, but I'm learning a lot about as well. So it's not like a skill that I necessarily needed right now, but it's something that I'm learning from all of my team members right now.
That's a great point, and so common in the nonprofit space. I think probably almost anybody working in a nonprofit, fundraising touches your role, even if you are not on the fundraising staff. If you're a program staff, you're probably providing them information to put out in their materials that are part of grant proposals, or sharing them what you've been up to that year with potential donors. You might be helping write grant proposals. You might even be fundraising your own salary, but you're definitely fundraising touches what you do. I think it's a great point that is something you can definitely learn on the job. It's also something to think about if you do see the opportunity. I think we would probably agree it would be valuable to, dip your toe in ahead of time if you have the chance in college to think about fundraising or do a little bit of fundraising in, you're an extracurricular or a student organization. It is definitely, it's everywhere. Okay, and then I want to put a pin in Gabby's comment about compensation, because I do think it's something we should talk about if we have time, because I think there are things, it's real, but there are things you can think about and sort of weigh. So I want to try to get back to that, but we have a great question from Erica in the audience. What advice do you have for finding open positions and weighing opportunities at new, smaller or new nonprofits versus established or larger nonprofits? And I'll say, let's say for the Q&A, folks can sort of chime in as they want. So I won't go around. If you feel like everything's been covered, you can just, say we're good. So I'll just let folks, we'll try out, just unmute and respond as the spirit moves you.
Yeah, I really want to answer this question first because I think, so I'll just say my experience with Leading Women of Tomorrow. I was the chapter president at the chapter at AU. So for me, when I saw the posting, it was easy for me to get the position because I already had the experience with the organization. But in addition to looking at LWT positions, I was also looking at other positions in other nonprofit organizations. And I think ultimately I chose Leading Women of Tomorrow because I knew it was fairly new. And I knew that at an established organization, I probably wouldn't have the chance to give my opinion and input as much in comparison to LWT. And I know for me, I really value being heard and being able to give my advice. And I think I've helped out with a lot of things already in LWT. So I think this question is personal because some people may be fine working in an organization that has been established so they can just do the work on the sidelines. But I know for me, I really wanted to feel like I was important and that I was helping people. So, I mean, there are definitely positions open on LinkedIn. I've seen so many, I applied to some, but ultimately I chose Leading Women of Tomorrow because I felt like that, because it was so new, I would be helping the organization continue to succeed into the future. So that's what I would say to that.
I would just add too, and this kind of builds on some of what Sarah and Gabby were both saying about some of their experiences in undergrad sort of leading to the positions that they're in today. I worked on a presidential campaign as a college student when I was an undergrad, and I did also intern at the, on that campaign at the campaign headquarters, and I met a lot of different people. And coming out of undergrad, I remember I applied for 80 some jobs, and a lot of them like through Idealist. That's a great place to look and see what is out in the nonprofit sector. But it was someone who I knew through working on that campaign that got me connected with the nonprofit that I ended up working in initially right when I got out of college. And that experience really has led to a lot of the different opportunities that I've had. When I moved back to DC, after working at the University of Kansas and getting my master's in public administration there, I got the job that I did, which led to founding the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, also because of connections that I had from someone that I had met and worked on the campaign with back when I was an undergrad. So again, those experiences are just so invaluable. And I just highly recommend getting as many different kinds of experiences and different kinds of internships as you can. Because even though, like I said, I had one that I decided not to go along that path, I had others as well that were really helpful.
And I can add a little bit because you mentioned Idealist. When I was looking for jobs after grad, I knew I wanted to work in a nonprofit. Like I knew that I'm a mission-driven individual and I wanted to work for somewhere with like a strong mission. So something I did was I used Idealist, used like some of the other sites as well, but that was where most of the nonprofit jobs are posted. But I also looked up organizations that had missions that I connected to personally. And then I went onto those websites and found those jobs because a lot of the times they don't post them, or smaller organizations might not post their job openings anywhere else. So you might want to have like a couple places in mind that you might want to work and just check their website periodically to see if they have any openings, or reach out to somebody. Like if you see someone on LinkedIn, message them on LinkedIn and ask if they have any openings, because that's a great way to build your network.
That's such good advice, y'all. So because I used to be a teacher, maybe I always like to do like a summary. I think this is really good advice. So we've talked about LinkedIn and Idealist as two places where we have looked for jobs. When I did my most recent job search, I also did what Sarah just mentioned, and I had a list of like the 20 places I was most excited to work. And I bookmarked their just direct to their job board, and I would just check it like every week. I think that's a great idea if you do a combination of those three things. And then we've also heard a lot about the sort of the value of networks. I think alumni networks can be really helpful too. That's like an authentic connection you can have with someone. So if you're interested in a certain organization or a certain type of role, you might look for alumni on LinkedIn who were maybe political science grads from your college or university that you can reach out to with an authentic message, you know, not a, I don't know, something you've copied and pasted off of somewhere that sounds like a robot, but you know, I'm about to graduate, I went to the same school as you, like I'm a fellow alumni, I'd love to hear more about your role. Do you have time for, you know, a 10 or 15-minute phone call? I think you might be surprised at how many people would respond just based on that, you know, alumni connection and you're genuinely interested. And if you can share some genuine source of your interest, you know, I'm passionate about helping students vote, or I'm really looking for mission-driven work, helping young women find the careers that are right for them, right? Whatever that thing that's driving you is, if you can sort of share that, that's all such good advice. And then I think Gabby also had a great thought about the impact, the different kinds of impact and how quickly you can make that impact at sort of a smaller, newer organization versus maybe larger, more established nonprofit. As somebody who's at a pretty well-established / old, I mean, the National Academies has been around since Abraham Lincoln, and we're pretty big. We have a staff of 1,000. I think you can find a balance. And so if you're looking at a bigger organization, you might really look at the team you'll be on, because you'll still be in a smaller team of 10, 15, 20 people. So you can think about, is that team doing maybe innovative work, or did they have the priorities that I have? So that's something you might pay particular attention to, like your narrow team if you're looking at a huge organization, because they're really going to impact your day to day. And I think one of the perks of a larger organization is that there can be some more, you're not building there's like a saying, like building the plane while you're flying it or whatever. You're doing a little bit less of that. So one of the things I liked was that when I started my job, there was a template for absolutely anything I would ever need to do. Somebody had already done it. They had created a template. I could tweak it, but it was there. So there are definitely perks to both, I think. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. If we have other audience questions, please feel free to share them. Oh, we do, from Mary. Mary says, what do you do if a situation comes up where you disagree with something your organization is doing or a policy they're promoting? Would it be a deal breaker? That's a great question, Mary, especially since we've all talked about how sort of mission-driven we are and our organizations are. Who wants to tackle that one first? I will say this is a tough one, so feel free to think a little bit.
I feel like this question is tough because it really does depend on the organization and who's leading the organization. My executive director, even though she's very mission driven, she's been really, really great with compromising with us, and I really appreciate that. And I do not think I would stay at the organization if she wasn't compromising with us. And one thing that I often do is ask to meet with her one-on-one. If there's still disagreement, we'll have meetings with the top board members to kind of go over everything and figure out what we can do to make things better. I don't think it should be a deal breaker, but it obviously depends on the issue, of course. If it's something really personal and ethical, then clearly it should be a deal breaker. But I think most times it just has to do with, should we implement this policy, or should we create like separate social media accounts, or so on and so on. I haven't really seen anything really bothersome to me, but obviously someone else may have a different experience. But I think ultimately talking it out and trying to come to middle ground is important first.
Yeah, I'll also just say, I think sometimes this also sort of depends on what your options are and what your role is. So your question automatically makes me think of a situation that we were in recently, in that we are a fiscally sponsored project. We recently moved from one nonprofit that was sponsoring us to another one because we did have a disagreement with our fiscal sponsor, and we just weren't in agreement with the way that they were doing things. And so this was a really big decision for us, because this meant literally moving the employment of our 10 team members from one nonprofit to another. But it was a deal breaker for us. And ultimately we did make the decision to do that. So I think some of those kinds of things like are a little bit of what I was alluding to when I was mentioning, sometimes it's hard to know like what is the best situation for the work that you're doing. And it is unique to be sort of in that position where you can't even do something like that, but it happens and it comes up. And those are really hard things to try to figure out and work through, and to also figure out who all to involve in those types of decisions like that. But
I don't have too much to add because this hasn't happened to me, thankfully. But I will say it's hard when you're working on something that you care a lot about and you come into a situation where you disagree. I mean, there's been some things where I've thought, ooh, maybe we could expand to this area, but I'm not in charge of the organization, so that's not up to me. I'll just say, thankfully, I haven't had to deal with this, but personally, if something was a deal breaker for me, then yeah, I would definitely have to speak up about it and maybe speak to my supervisor.
These are great responses to a tough question. And I think one of the big questions is, to what extent, is it an ethical or principle issue? Is it about sort of program design? Those are maybe those will raise different considerations. But I think really thinking about, are you being heard in important ways? And it sounds like Gabby has a great environment, just from her example, I'm sure we all do, but really having a chance to be heard and be part of a conversation. And like Sarah said, we're also passionate about the work that we're doing, that you can take things really personally, even if it's not an ethical sort of principled issue, but maybe it's just about program design or a strategic plan. When you feel passionately about the issues, it can be hard to see sort of things go in a different direction. And that's, I think, probably common across nonprofits. So I do think thinking about having an environment and looking for a workplace where it's clear that you can be heard and you can be part of decision making, even if things don't always go your way, or that your perspective is valued, and that there's spaces for you to share that. These are great questions. I'm so appreciative of our audience members. Invite other questions. I also have a couple questions that I was hoping we'd have time to get to, so I'm taking a look at those now. Oh, actually, this one is, I think, kind of on track with what Mary just asked. Do you all have any suggestions for what to look for or for questions to ask in the interview process in looking for a nonprofit employer? And here we might think about some of the compensation questions that came up, or thoughts that came up earlier, or thinking about the sort of healthy, supportive work environment that we started touching on. So thoughts on, what do we look for in interviewing? Are there questions we ask? Are there practices or vibes that we're looking for? Some of it can be, I think, some of those emotional intelligence skills definitely come into interviewing. But sometimes there's just a concrete question you can ask that can be really illuminating. Anyone have any thoughts around this?
yeah, I think job interviews and the whole process can be really telling and really can give you a lot of signals about what it would be like to work in any specific organization and what the work environment is there. I think the first thing that I would say is look at the job description, because even looking at that, like one red flag for me is always if it doesn't list the salary or even the salary range, that's a red flag right off the bat that organization might not highly value equity and transparency, which is really important. Then I think once you get to the interview stage, how communicative are they? Do they communicate the full process of what the interview will look like from the outset and stay in touch with you through that? I know a lot of people that have had bad experiences with just not really hearing much from people throughout the process. And that, I think, is also an indicator. Who participates in the interviews, I think, is also important. Like, is it just the person that's going to be your supervisor, or are there other people on the team? And depending on the role in the organization, like, are there other partners that are also involved in the interview process as well. And then I think just in terms of questions to ask, I think it's really important to kind of learn what it will be like for you to be in that role. How directly will you be in contact with your supervisor? Will you have regular check-ins? What kind of professional development processes do they have in place? I think all of those things are definitely ones that should be asked and can really give you a sense of what the work environment will be like.
Yeah, I really echo what Clarissa said. I mean, I feel like you can tell a lot about an organization, not based on what they do say, but what they don't say. You know what I mean? Do they post the salary range and so on and so on? So I really agree with that. I think ultimately the vibe is also so important. I know for me, I've done interviews where the vibe was just off, and like that's where emotional intelligence comes into play. I mean, do you feel comfortable talking to this person? Say it's the executive director. What if you have meetings with them in the future when you're working with them? If you don't feel comfortable with them, I don't think it's the best idea to move forward, right? So yeah, I definitely agree. Sometimes what's unsaid is more important than what's said.
And something to add to, not a question to ask maybe, but think about the questions they're asking you. In my job interview for this role, they asked me, or my supervisor said, like, how do you deal with stress? It's really important that we don't have anyone working for us that experiences burnout. So what do you do when you're experiencing stress in a work environment? And I was like, oh my gosh, never been asked that before. I don't even have this job yet. And you could already tell that they cared about the people that were going to work for them. And so I was like, well, actually, and I said something along the lines of, I like to step away, go for a walk. And then when I got hired, I found out that's exactly what she does. So me and my boss would go for a walk whenever we were stressed out together. So it was just something like that. Like, pay attention to the questions that you're being asked, because that is the values as well.
That's great advice. I'm going to go to you all the next time I'm applying for jobs. I'm going to call a quorum of this group. These are such good suggestions. So pay attention to your gut, I think. Pay attention to sort of how comfortable do people make you feel comfortable? Do they set you at ease? Does the vibe feel right? What kinds of questions do they ask you? I also loved what Clarissa had to say about the process. Like, the whole process is, one, I think you're interviewing them. That can be really hard to wrap your head around, but like, you're also choosing an employer. So you're interviewing them. Are they being transparent and communicative? Because those are very strong signals early on. Who are they including in the process? I love that, right? Is it only super, super senior people? What does that say about how they value different perspectives in the organization? Those are all great suggestions. And if we could just like shout from the rooftops, put your salary range in your job ads, I would love that. One other thing that I was just thinking about, I also think figuring out if you can find out who's directly supervising you and what their management style is, and if you know what you're looking for in a work environment. I really value trust and empathy on any team that I'm working on. That's not always the case. So you can have kind of keywords in mind in advance of like, what do I want in a working environment? And I love that question about how you deal with stress, Sarah. It sounds like they've got a good process there. Yeah, that's so good. Does anyone do we want to talk a little bit about compensation and nonprofits? I feel like that's sort of the elephant in the room. Often when folks are thinking about like, do I want to go nonprofit or maybe into sort of private industry, that might be a big thing that they're weighing. We've talked a lot about, I think, unique perks of nonprofits because they're nonprofits, right? Some of the mission-driven work, some of the ability to impact, that's a real value, but sometimes folks are concerned about compensation. So does anyone have any suggestions for how to think about compensation, just cheerleading people on to negotiate, how to think about maybe other benefits? I'm just going to open the floor to thoughts and tips on compensation.
Yeah, I will just say to your point, I think it is also really important to look at the full benefits package of nonprofits. Some maybe more established ones are probably, quite honestly, able to offer more generous benefits, but that is one thing that's been really important for us and our team to also show that we are living out our values by the benefits that we're providing to our team. So like definitely be looking at like what vacation and like PTO policies are like. Another thing that I've learned is like looking at like, is health insurance provided? And if it is, like, does the organization provide like 100% of the coverage or like just a percentage of that? Those kind of things I think as well, like overall contribute to your overall like benefits package, which is really important on top of just the salary piece of things, because it affects what ultimately you're getting out of your salary.
Yeah, I'll say for me, I'm the one who brought it up, so I feel kind of guilty, sorry. But you know what? I feel like for me, when I signed up for this position, I knew I wasn't going to be compensated as much because we're fairly new and we're still getting together all of our other benefits and packages, such as tuition reimbursement, which is something I'm really, really excited about because a lot of our girls that come on are girls who just got out of college like me. So it's something I'm really, really happy about. And I think that's something that's really important, like Clarissa said, to look at the whole benefits package. And I mean, I'm optimistic for the future to see how things go. But yeah, I think with newer organizations, obviously compensation is more of a touchy topic than with well-established organizations, obviously.
And I could just add that something that I was looking at, I'm actually from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So whenever I was looking at jobs, I found that it really varied by city. So if you're looking to just move wherever, you'll see that in job postings. I mean, they're higher in DC than they are in Pittsburgh. And if you're willing to move, like you can find a city that will compensate you more. And especially for first job, like now that I started out with like a DC range, like I could move back home if I want to and be able to negotiate that for a Pittsburgh job.
These are great points. And I would also say, look at retirement. That's something that I did not think about for a long time, but starting to, sock away retirement early. And if your employer is making a contribution, that can be really helpful. So that's part of thinking about that sort of whole package. I will say one of the things I really value about at least my path in nonprofit work and my current role, is work-life balance. So you can also think about, obviously you need to make a living wage, you need to have basic benefits provided, but for me, I really value having work-life balance. I have some friends who are in private industry and work every single night until 9 p.m. So that's for me part of the sort of total package as well. We are right up against our time. So I will say thank you so much to our audience. Thank you to our panelists. I definitely learned something today. I hope everyone else did.